Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Institute of Risk Management webinar. I'm really pleased about today's topic. We're going to be talking about the implementation of business continuity management system, and it's going to be a practical introduction to the BCMS and what does this mean even during COVID. Actually, I'm very pleased with the number of attendees that we have so far. We have like more than 27, 28 now, and hopefully we're going to make a full use of this time, and it's going to be an enjoyable session. It is it's 4 minutes past the 3:30, so I think it's better for us to start going ahead right away. I would like to request some ground rules. Please, if you're not speaking, mute yourself. You can use the chat for questions. You can ask questions through the chats, and I'll be helping coordinating and facilitating this. But we will also have an informative discussion, and we're going to have a QA at the end. So you might sometimes just keep your discussion and questions to the end. We've actually exceeded 32 participants. It's really great to know. Sounds like it's a very important topic that a lot of people are interested in, and this is good to know. That's a good question. So Patrick is asking to turn off the audio transcript. That's a bit distracting. I really like this artificial intelligence feature of these new technology platforms, but I think you have a good point here, Pat. And let me go disable animation annotation. It's called annotation. Is this one? No, I don't know. I don't know how to disable this, Pat. Do you know how to do that? Any tips? Sounds like I'm gonna have to ignore this because I don't know how to do it. Maybe no.
I think it'll be interesting to see how it copes with the Scottish accent, Tim.
It will work, David.
Has anyone seen the video of the elevator with the people trying to use the voice activation to get it to go to floor 11?
Just avoid 11.
I know, but I can imagine. But these things are really coming handy, and it's really improving a lot. So we're 35 now, guys. Without further ado, let me start. So today we're going to talk about business continuity management system. I'm going to be the host. My name is Hatem. I'm the chair of the Institute of Risk Management. I'm also, and I'm just going to be presenting the exceptional panel that we have today, who are going to talk to us about the business continuity, about the topic of today. We have Alex Larson. He's like a risk management celebrity, been working in risk for more than 20 years. A huge experience in the oil and gas. He's been working in Qatar and doing a number of projects in enterprise risk management, business continuity, and working for Qatar Foundation. And he's also an executive in Baldwin Global, which actually a company that is leading in the risk management and the business continuity, and they are developing their own frameworks and methodologies, etc. Then we have David Stewart. And David is an ex-police officer in the UK. He was a chief superintendent officer in the police force, but in the same time, more than 35 years of experience in crisis management, security, and law enforcement. Extensive knowledge when it comes to crisis management situations, safety, and business continuity. He's been an expert in the business continuity. Last but not least, Marie is another big experience when it comes to business continuity, especially here in Qatar. She has more than 12 years of experience in risk management, implementing, developing a lot of business continuity platforms and programs in number of companies, and especially oil and gas companies. And some of them are here in Qatar, as you can see, Capco, Qatar Foundation. She's been influential in these successful implementations that we have here in Qatar. Without further ado, I'd like to pass to Alex, who's going to be starting talking to us and giving us some background about BCM, and then we'll take it from there with the questions and answers at the end. Alex?
Thank you very much for the introduction, an over-the-top introduction, but thank you nonetheless. I want to start with the BP case study, Deepwater Horizon. If no one's watched it, quite a good film you could watch. And there's some certain scenes from the film that really focus in on some really key failures. And I usually use it as a risk management example in my trainings. I usually cut the video and use it. But either way, it's based on the true story, Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which obviously you can see some disastrous pictures, not pleasant to see. And basically it happened off the Gulf of Mexico. And basically, you can imagine how many lives were ruined, tourism was ruined, fishermen livelihoods were ruined, and there were some huge consequences to BP as well. What people tend to forget or not realize even in the oil industry is that it wasn't just BP. If you can click the button, Hatem, it wasn't just BP that was involved here, and I'll get to that. But if we look at the disaster in numbers, there was more than 200 million gallons of crude oil over 87 days spilled, 16,000 total miles of coastline. Imagine that, 16,000 miles of coastline, a ridiculous amount of coastline. 8,000 animals reported dead, that's bad enough. And then 40 billion in fines, 16 billion Clean Water Act and cleanup costs. But this is just the numbers. When it comes to reputation, everyone remembers BP, 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 BP. Not very many people are aware outside of the oil industry, very few. Inside the oil industry, still quite a few. And if you click now, we'll see who else was actually involved. It was BP, Halliburton, Transocean, and Cameron. They were all involved, but the one that got the worst brunt of the reputational impact was BP. And this was a lesson on reputational risk and the dangers of just transferring risk and not having a good enough plan. And we'll conclude this presentation on why this didn't work for them. What was the failure? But I just wanted to highlight this horrible disaster, that business continuity and having good business continuity plans would certainly have improved. Next slide, please. So if we look at risk management as a whole, risk management is in place to stop bad things from happening or ensure that good things do happen, if you look at it from the opportunity perspective. But essentially, risk management is there to stop bad things from happening and making good things happen, but also preparing for the worst. And that's where, if you click Hatem, we'll see that preparing for the worst is exactly where business continuity management comes in. Now, of course, we have insurance, but forget insurance, because insurance just gives you some monetary value back, and insurance companies are notorious for trying to avoid paying you. They have huge teams to do that. And also, for every dollar you spend, every dollar you get back, you're spending about anywhere between $4 to $36, depending on the industry, in costs associated with the insurance. So it's not all that great, and it doesn't protect reputation. What does protect reputation is business continuity management. It helps service, it helps get your activities back up and running. It's made up of things such as business continuity plans, emergency response plans, disaster recovery, crisis communication, and I'll talk a little bit about this. As you can see, as soon as an incident occurs, we need emergency response. And the emergency response is save lives, save assets, put out the fires, evacuate. We're thinking about everyone else and the assets. But then we have to start thinking about ourselves as well. And we start going towards the crisis management and communication plans, which should be getting started at the same time as the emergency response. But the emergency response is really the first response. Crisis management is, sorry, can we go back? Crisis management is much more high level, strategic. We get the crisis communication together, the team together to start looking at what is this current situation? How do we need to deal with it? Let's start getting some press out there. Let's start responding to this, getting ahead of it. But also, do we need to actually invoke any of our business continuity plans? If we have business continuity plans, are any of these relevant and should we get them started now? And then that leads into business continuity, which is essentially, how do we get back up and running as quickly as possible? Disaster recovery is the IT aspect, and that's what keeps everything together, making sure that the services are available for most businesses nowadays that are all reliant on IT infrastructure. Next slide, please. So what is the purpose of business continuity then? We're trying to identify time-critical and essential services, our products, our resources. What is essential to our business to keep it running? We want to safeguard our corporate assets. In other words, we're trying to develop strategies to ensure that our products, our services, our activities, we can still either sell, provide a service, or whatever it is. It might be the government providing a service to their people. It might be a service company or consultants providing their consultancy to someone, or it might be products that you sell. Can we still sell our products? We want to minimize the effects of the incident, and we need to make sure that we're training staff to respond and recover in a time-sensitive manner. And we'll get to that, but training and culture is critical. We can see many failures coming from lack of communication and training and understanding. Next slide, please. So simply put, when a negative event occurs, bad things happen, and you can see that our productivity or our services stop. And that's that fall after the negative event. If no business continuity plans are in place, there's a good chance that you won't survive. You can survive, but a lot of it has to do with luck, hard work, and it's a grind. It's a lot of panic. It's a lot of trying to sort of figure it out as you go along. Having business continuity plans in place gives you a much greater chance of success and recovery, but it also takes away all the panic and trying to figure out what we should do next. And it also supports in the whole communication piece as well. And remember, communication is internal with your staff, as well as stakeholders, internal and external as well. There was actually a study done. 15 high-profile catastrophes were reviewed. And they looked at a period of 250 days. They looked at companies that had been impacted negatively by certain events, catastrophes. And what they found was that companies that had no business continuity arrangements fell about 15% over 250 days, cumulative abnormal returns. Whilst those that did have continuity planning or risk management or a good culture for risk found an average of a 5 to 10% increase. Now, obviously, this has to do with trust and confidence from stakeholders and shareholders and investors. If you can recover from a disaster because you had good planning in place, that's your reputation impacted positively, and people are going to trust you going forward. Let's look at another line here of companies that were not even affected by a catastrophe. They were doing business as usual, doing well, but generally they didn't increase as much as the companies who were able to recover because they had good continuity. So this is a really good example of where risk management, business continuity can actually add value to your business, give you a competitive edge, competitive advantage. Let's not always focus on the negative of risk management. Let's see how we can flip bad situations into a positive and get ahead of the game. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to hand over to Marie for this. This is essentially the 5 phases of business continuity plan. Obviously you need a policy and procedure as well, but these are the five phases that you would go through in order to actually put together your business continuity plans. And I'll pass over to Marie just now to discuss that.
Can everyone hear me fine? Yes. Okay, so when we implement business continuity in an organization, we essentially go through a 4-step process, which is aligned to best practice, namely ISO 22301 or the good practice guidelines from the Business Continuity Institute. And so the first phase, which tends to be the most time consuming, but also the most important one, is the business impact analysis, also known as the BI. And so as part of this phase, our aim really is to understand the organization, and we do that by identifying its critical processes and activities, but also the critical resources that those processes depend on, whether it is key suppliers, key technologies, key staff, or key assets. And we then look at, okay, what are the impacts of interrupting those critical activities so that we can come up with recovery time objectives or RTOs. So it is those RTOs that are really going to be driving the selection of business continuity strategies and ultimately the development of BCPs. So basically, it is through the BIA that we're in a position to understand what are the recovery priorities following a disruption, and what are those resources that must be up and running, and by when. Risk assessments will also take place as part of this phase, but they're focused more on things like what might actually cause a failure to recover, as opposed to what are the various risks which an organization may face, because this is usually also the scope of more extensive ERM programs. And so once this is done, once the BIA is completed, am I getting some, okay. So the next phase really is about selecting the strategies or workarounds which are going to help the organization maintain its operation in spite of the unavailability of a key resource, so in spite of a key supplier or a key technology, for example. And so we will look here into quick wins, but also longer.
Guys, just a second, Marie. There is someone who's not muted. Can you please all make sure that you are muted? Or otherwise I'm going to have to mute you all. Thank you. Thank you. Marie, sorry. Sorry for interruption, Marie.
No problem. So whenever we do look into strategies, we do look into quick wins and workarounds that are already available in the organization, but also longer term strategies, which are going to require more time and also more funding to get those up and running. So it might be that strategies, when we initially implement BCM, are only going to become available as part of year 2 or year 3 of a program. And also often the organization already does business continuity and has various contingency measures already in place or which are informal. So one of our role might be to formalize these or enhance them so that they become even more robust. And that is a key part, because especially in these time of days, there are no organizations that are not doing any business continuity of any way or shape or form. And so all of this work will be captured in the next phase as part of the business continuity plans development. So it is essentially here about documenting and formalizing the selected strategies and the available workarounds. And lastly, well, it's all very nice to have BCPs, but if your teams do not know how to use them, well, it's a bit pointless, isn't it? So the last phase is really about providing awareness to your teams about the plans, but it's also about testing and validating those plans to ensure that they are actually effective. So that's it for me on this slide.
It's an extensive slide, has a lot of things into it, Marie. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, so just to leave you, before I hand you over to David, who's going to talk more on the crisis management, I'd just like to give you an example of how having a business continuity plan can actually save your business or, again, give you that competitive edge. Back when we used to have the phones that you can see in the background of this picture, the Motorola, the Ericsson, and the Nokias, the big chunky phones that some of you are maybe too young to remember, lucky you. But basically, they use the same chip manufacturer, both Nokia and Ericsson. And a fire at one of the manufacturer's key factories meant that there was limited supply. So if you imagine the two competitors using the same chip, basically coming from the same company supplier, when that supplier disappears from the market, what are you left with? Well, there's one or two smaller players that everyone's fighting for. Now, Nokia had a backup agreement with that supplier. So although they were unable to continue selling and building their phones at the same level that they were before this incident, at least they could continue, something Ericsson were unable to do. Nokia stole the market. Ericsson basically went out of business, if not for joining forces with Sony. And that's how Sony became Sony, or sorry, Ericsson became Sony Ericsson. It was because of this, because they did not have a suitable business continuity plan the way Nokia did. And I will hand over to David, who will cover managing a crisis.
Thanks, Alex. Alex has already mentioned the importance of crisis management in the broader business continuity management. So as he said, what I'm going to do just now is just take a very quick run through some of the key principles of crisis management. The next slide shows that the definition of a crisis, very simply, a time of intense difficulty or danger, or a time when important or difficult decisions need to be made. And one of the most important things about crisis is that it can either be expected or unexpected. Also, it's important to remember that what can be a crisis for one organization isn't necessarily a crisis for another organization. So for some companies, an incident that costs them $1 million reals could be catastrophic, whereas for other companies, it may just be a blip that they'll recover from very quickly. Now, what the next slide will show you is that there are lots of different types of crises. Hatem, could we move on?
Yes.
Thank you. So loads and loads of different types of crises, but very interestingly, in 2013, the Institute of Crisis Management in the US did a survey that found that 1/3 of all crises were unexpected, they were sudden. But what that means is that 2/3 of all crises are actually things that we can anticipate, and they're perhaps smouldering or creeping crises where warning signals have either been missed or mitigation steps haven't been effective enough. And what's happened then as it grows. And this slide, when you look at all the cogs on that wave there, if the wave is the crisis, the cogs are all the different things that could potentially lead to the crisis. And what crisis management, along with risk management and business continuity management, can do is try and anticipate some of that to try and reduce the impact of the crisis. An interesting point in this, I think, just now, if you look at COVID, was COVID unexpected? The UK National Risk Register, the United Kingdom, had pandemic as its top risk for over the last 10 years. Now, almost a year after the UK had its first case of COVID, the death rate from COVID in the UK is almost the worst in the world. So they had it on the risk register, but they still dealt with it badly. So is that a failure in risk management or a failure in crisis management? And that's maybe something that we can discuss in the question and answer session. So on the next slide, if we look at preparation, some areas to consider, and these are very, very basic. I'm not saying anything here that any of you would not be aware of, but monitoring. So as risk professionals, what risk professionals would do is horizon scan. They would look at what the risks are and how they can mitigate them. But in crisis management, roles are very critical. It's vital in any organization that people involved in crisis management know what their role is, and also that everyone's on the same page. Some of the things that go wrong in crisis management is when disenchanted staff in particular either don't do what they should do or perhaps leak something to the press that causes some embarrassment. Organization and bureaucracy is also really important. The organization of a crisis management team in order to respond. If you have bureaucratic silos that mean that internal information isn't passed quickly to other parts of the people who are, the teams who are dealing with the crisis, that can have a negative impact. Internal communications is absolutely clear. I've got an example that I'll show you in just a moment where the internal communication didn't go right. Stakeholders, your audience, who are the stakeholders that will be interested in what you're doing and how you're doing them. And Alex has already touched on BP and we'll touch on it again. But if you think of who the stakeholders were in that and who the audience was in that, again, really important that you cover all the bases. The one big thing for me, planning, testing, training and exercising. So planning, and Marie and Alex have both talked about the planning that's required in business continuity management, and in crisis management it's exactly the same. What are the crisis management plans? How do you know that they're working? Well, you train people in them and then you test and exercise. And I can't overestimate the importance of training and exercising in relation to crisis management. Really important having a crisis management team. Hatem, could we move on? So the team doesn't need to be huge. As you'll see there on the right-hand side, Johnson & Johnson set up a CMT that only contains 7 people to deal with a huge issue that they had a few years ago. But the important thing about the team, it needs to be trained. You need to determine who's going to be on it. Is your CEO going to be leading the CMT? And again, that's perhaps something for a later discussion. But you need senior people from IT, your risk people, your PR, HR, finance. People don't think of that, but in lots of companies, the senior finance people need to be part of that crisis management team. The CMT has to have clear terms of reference, and the team has to have full authority. So if the CEO is not the person who's leading the team, whoever is leading the team has to have that full authority. You can't stop in the middle of a crisis to ask someone permission to do something. You have to be able to have that autonomy. Interesting as well about where will your crisis management team run from. If the crisis is that your headquarters building has burnt down, then you obviously need to have a backup command center in place. And the command center doesn't need to be full of televisions and screens. It just needs to be a physical venue that you can work from. And in fact, perhaps maybe not even a physical venue now. I think COVID has taught lots of us about how you can work remotely and still manage crisis. And Alex touched on it earlier, the CMT should also be responsible for invoking your business continuity plan. At that point in that timeline from the crisis having taken place, the emergency response and the CMT leading that response, the important thing is what's happening to day-to-day business. And the CMT will be responsible for invoking the business continuity plan. So interesting thing that the previous slide had mention of the CEO. This was the same survey from that I referred earlier, where almost half of the respondents who had run crisis management exercises in the previous year identified a lack of senior management buy-in and support as the biggest challenge to them effectively preparing their organization for the crisis. And almost half hadn't involved the CEO or other leaders. And the reason for that wasn't that the consultants or the internal team who were running these exercises didn't want them. It was actually that the leaders didn't want to be involved. It could be that they didn't have time. It was perhaps that they didn't want to be put in a position where in front of others they were tested and didn't get all the answers right. But it's really, really critical that CEOs and senior people are part of the training and testing and exercising for crisis management. And moving on, Hatem. So if we look at communication, again, Alex also mentioned crisis communication. Communication is really critical during a response to a crisis. You need to look at stakeholders and who these are. And again, really important, given that I'm speaking from the UK about Qatar, that it would be different depending on where your organization operates. So if you've got a multinational organization that operates in Qatar and externally, you maybe have to also think differently about both who you're communicating with and how you're communicating, because the press and media are different in different areas in different countries. But if you look at the stakeholders, if there's victims, families, communities, government, again, the larger the crisis, the more the government need to be involved, the emergency services, the public is critical. I lived on the Pearl back in 2016, for those that were there and remember the 24-hour power cut that we had there, and trying to get information at that point in time about what was going on was really challenging. So the public is an important stakeholder in what you're doing when you're responding to a crisis, if they are impacted upon it. Even your own website, if your website isn't up to date, it's the first thing that people will look at. They'll go to a website, they'll use social media. There's a variety of different things that they will do. And for the next slide, Hatem, social media is really important, because nowadays, and this is a quote from the Crisis Response Journal from a couple of years ago, but social media doesn't call the press officer for a fact check. Myths become accepted reality. I don't know how many of you are not on Twitter or Instagram or somewhere else. Twitter is the world's worst for sharing inaccurate information, because one person can put it on and then it goes viral. And you only have to look at what happened recently with the elections in the US, and the president of the United States, no less, having his Twitter account blocked for misinformation that was being put on it. Incredible to think of that, but the number of members of the public who use Twitter and can share inaccurate information. Again, in Qatar, you're fortunate because there are laws in place that can prevent people from doing that, or at least make them think twice about doing that. But certainly here in the UK, that's not the case. I want to touch just on a couple of slides before I finish off and hand back to Alex around leadership at times of crisis. And some really important things to remember: that crisis leadership is different from business as usual. And sometimes the characteristics of what makes a great CEO may not be the same characteristics required to lead in a crisis. And the ability to manage in a crisis is not necessarily innate within most people. Crisis demand different skills. The amount of pressure and time scale that comes on at crisis is incredible. And I've been there, and I can avow to that. But lots of successful leaders will actually have avoided crisis. They won't have had that hands-on experience of dealing with a crisis. But where we have a positive with crisis management is that crisis leadership and management can be learned. And again, as I say, through testing, exercising, and training, we can teach people within organizations how to deal with times of crisis. We can imitate the amount of pressure that gets put on at times of crisis. The key to all of this is preparation. There's a really nice quote, which is the CEO of Intel, who has said that most CEOs are at the center of a fortified place, and that news from the outside has to percolate through the periphery. And what he means with that is that there's lots of times that people in the hierarchy below him don't want to give him bad news. So therefore, bad news gets pushed back down. And that in itself can then mean that the CEO is not aware of an impending crisis. So when you have leaders at the center of something, as good risk managers, as business continuity managers, as crisis managers, it's our job to try and be honest with people who may have to deal with a crisis about what's likely to come. A very quick case study, just summing some of that up. Back in 2017, there was a power surge at Terminal 5 at Heathrow Airport in London, which is the main British Airways terminal. 75,000 people were left stranded unable to get their luggage. And there was a real breakdown in internal communications. Staff dealing with passengers were still checking passengers in at the same time as the BBC were reporting that all flights had been cancelled. So you had people on their phones finding out from the BBC that their flight had been cancelled before British Airways were telling them that their flight had been cancelled, which caused chaos on the ground. There was lack of leadership on the ground. No one took control. It was a bank holiday weekend. So a holiday weekend, there was no one in the PR department managing the Twitter account. So there was a delay in everything going out on Twitter, and all that was happening was people complaining on Twitter with no response. And then the CEO video, and if we can get the next slide, Hatem, the CEO put out a video where he was in the corporate headquarters office wearing a yellow jacket. And immediately what happened on Twitter is everyone started mocking him because he was trying to show that he was operational instead of just appearing on his suit. And I suspect that a media advisor had probably suggested that a high-vis jacket would make him look like he was handling the situation, but social media thought otherwise. So the next video that came out after that was him not wearing the high-vis jacket. The tweets on the right that there's copies of there, I don't think you'll be able to see them just now, but basically this shows the delay in British Airways corporate getting back to people. So you can see that one there. Actually, someone tweeted on the 27th of May about something that was happening to them at that point in time, and British Airways replied to it on the 30th of May. So for social media, that just doesn't work. So concluding, it's been a really quick run through. I'm very much aware of that. Some of these are easier said than done. You know, try to head off the crisis before they develop. It says here in this slide, this is leadership, but actually it's also about risk management, business continuity management, doing what we do, looking at what's coming and trying to anticipate it, trying to mitigate it. But when the crisis does happen, you need to have staff who are empowered and trusted. They need to have the tools and the training. The crisis management team need to be trained and exercised around what's happening so that they are far more capable of handling it. The team must have terms of reference that are clear and full authority. The command center and backup need to be in place. And it's important for the organization never to just disappear or bury their head in the sand. And I think nowadays with social media, that can't happen. So, as I say, that was a really quick canter through. I know we're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end, but I'll hand you back over to Alex now to look at the implementation of BCM and what we've been working with in Qatar over the last year.
Thanks, David. That's brilliant. Yeah, we're going to be talking about implementation. And Hatem, if you could just go to the next slide. I'm going to hand over to Marie, who's going to talk a little bit about the experiences that we've had. So we as a team, there's 3 of us, we've come together, we're working together, and we are working with various clients, and we've had to adjust the way we do things. And Marie will talk a little bit about this based on our experiences, because not only have we had to work in different types of companies who have different cultures and different structures, but we've also had to face a change in approach because of COVID, where we've suddenly not been allowed to travel, and people aren't even at their offices. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So Marie, over to you.
Yeah, so if there's one thing that COVID has showed us is that, you know, a successful approach to BCM cannot be off the shelf. It has to be collaborative also, because every organization is unique, and what might work in one may not be as effective in another. Businesses have different processes, cultures, their structures, and, you know, ways that they address their issues are different. So, you know, a successful approach has to be adaptive. It's also very important to be able to work across the various silos. And one of the ways to do that it is to develop plans that are based on product as opposed to having departmental plans. And this is especially relevant for large manufacturing companies, but also in organizations where the resources to manage a BCM program would be quite lean. Again, it's all about finding what works for a specific organization. And so about that, organizations may choose to purchase a software to support their program. And softwares are great in supporting all of the admin tasks, such as, plan updates, version control. All of this lead to a lot of time savings, especially again in large organizations that do have various plans in place. But we've also seen in the past that software may not work as well, or may not be received as well in maybe with a less tech savvy crowd. Yes, next slide, thank you. And so, a successful BCM program at the end of the day also has to involve various external stakeholders and especially key partners and suppliers. And so if you have some contracted parts of your activities to third parties, but you don't know what their own arrangements or capabilities with regards to BCM are, then how can you be sure that you are truly prepared for any potential disruption? You're literally left exposed. And so it is crucial that your program looks into your supply chain, and that down the line, once your program is a bit more mature, that you seek to involve your partners in your exercises and testing effort. Next slide, please, Hatem. And so I was talking about the need to be adaptive in those times and days, and COVID has been all about that in order to be able to maintain the delivery of our work. And so as for everybody else, we had to adapt and move to a virtual approach so that we could push on and eventually meet the timelines. And so for us, this mostly entailed leveraging the various video conferencing tools that are available on the market. But we also had to adapt, for instance, the duration of our sessions, as well as our methods, our templates, so that they could be a bit more interactive, but also more fit for a virtual approach. And all throughout COVID and even until now, our team has been scattered in different parts of the world, supported by a team on the ground in Qatar. And well, to be honest, it's been pretty fantastic how we were able to keep in line with the project's objectives. And at the end of the day, COVID has certainly helped us, raise the importance of BCM to the very next level. There's no longer any hesitation or doubt as to what is the value of investing in BCM anymore. And that in itself has huge help in terms of getting time from, management, from the various people we needed to talk to. And so, it's been one positive outcome of COVID, if I could say, for our industry.
Thanks, Marie. So just before we finish off with this BP case study, Marie and David have mentioned quite a few important aspects. And one is the need to ensure that the business continuity approach is relevant to your organization or fits in with your structure or processes or culture. For example, we tend to look at what is currently in place. One client has a risk management process that's very mature, for example. From that perspective, we took that and we said, okay, well, let's work with that. What is the current process? What works within the risk management approach? And let's see if we can mirror that within the business continuity approach. And for example, they had a screening session before they would identify risks. So we took that concept that worked well in their organization and transferred it to business continuity, and it was familiar. People got it. So it was much easier to adapt to, okay, well, let's now try to look at critical activities and risks to our activities and do the BIAs, because they were already familiar with similar approaches. When we were scoring in terms of a sort of a scale to look at how impactful the activities were, we used the same scaling as well as in the risk management approach. So people were already familiar. We took the risk champions and made them the business continuity champions because it's so overlapping. We also heard the importance of communication. Now, I'm sure most of you based in Qatar, you'll be traveling a lot. You'll have experience traveling on various airlines, and you'll have been delayed in some cases. I remember I was traveling back from Oman. I was going back to Scotland, and there was too much snow in Scotland at the time, so all the flights were grounded. Now, I didn't know this until I landed in Dubai. I was flying Emirates. The minute I landed in Dubai, there was a lady waiting for me with my name, and I thought, oh, she's going to take me to my gate. But I thought I had a little bit of time, but fine, that's great. But no, she guided me to a desk where somebody was waiting to give me information to say, unfortunately, Glasgow Airport is closed. Your flight is therefore being cancelled, but don't worry. We'll take you to a hotel. It's been arranged. You'll get lunch vouchers. You'll stay there for as long as you need to. Everything's covered. And we'll bring your cases when they're ready, and we'll keep you updated. And they kept me updated. And guess what? I fly with Emirates every time I can, because I've flown with other flights before, like British Airways, and they give you no information, and it's extremely frustrating. It goes back to having a plan, and communication plan will actually give you value add. It will actually bring you confidence and more trust from your customers. And finally, I worked with a CEO who, like David had said, had no experience of crisis, but he wanted to make sure this worked. He wanted to make sure his team were alert and knew what they had to do. So he said, we're going to test it. Brilliant. When should we do the test? Surprise me. And he's like, and I don't mean surprise me on a day and give me a date a few days later. No. Any time of day or night, give me a call and boom, we'll get it started. I had to seek approval from my bosses at the time. I was working for a consultancy, so I wanted to check that this is okay. But we made it a big thing because no other CEO had asked this. So the consultancy company, we all got together and we agreed this is the best way to do it. Middle of the night, 2 a.m., we called the CEO, said there's a fire in your warehouse. There's not actually, but there's a fire in your warehouse, we told him. And he was like, okay, great. And he got the team together. They ran through the test. And my goodness, not only did they do well, but they saw a lot of problems in their plans that they were able to fix, because that's when you realize where you have to focus your energies. But why did BP fail? BP failed because there was no proper communication plan. We've seen the story about the CEO saying, I want my life back. And basically it backfired terribly. You know, oh, you want your life back with your sailboats. Oh, great. What about my life? I'm a fisherman and I can't fish anymore. For how long? For years. The CEO was unprepared, untrained. The plans were overly complex. One of the reasons Marie had mentioned earlier that you may already have plans in place unofficially. You already have business continuity planning, but it's important that we put them on paper. Why? Because you might not be there. The person that wrote it might not be there on the day of the event or the week of the event. They might be stuck on the other side of the world without access to internet. Marie's a climber. She likes to mountain climb Everest and so forth. If she's climbing Everest and I need to get in touch with her due to some crisis, funnily enough, she still seems to manage to be accessible. Wow. But she shouldn't be. And the point is, if I can't get a hold of her, I need to be able to pick up my plan and understand exactly what I should do. Don't make it overly complex. That's when things go bad. The problem with overly complex plans is it's difficult to update and they end up very thick. BP's business continuity plan was thick. They didn't update it, so they were outdated. And guess what? They were phoning up these salvage companies that had been out of business for 7 years. They were calling experts who were dead for 4 years. This is, you know, all the kind of stories you're getting out of there. There was no shared vision between the contractors either, so no one knew exactly what they were doing, and no training. This is why the training is a key aspect. Next slide. Thank you, everybody. From David, myself, and Marie. Thank you. And if there's any questions that we can discuss, we'd be happy to discuss them.
Alex, thank you so much. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, David. I've been actually getting a lot of questions during the session. I think I'm reflecting on everybody who's sticking to the call so far, that this has been very informative and interesting in the same time. You've been harsh on BP, where I actually have I worked there for quite some time. I was there during the crisis, but I think you're absolutely spot on in many of the aspects that you've been talking about. So yeah, I'll leave it there. But I think actually we are doing great with time, guys. We are actually now opening for a Q&A session where everybody is now having the chance to ask our panelists here questions. I've been getting some questions over the chat, which we will allow it. I have a couple of questions here, and I would like to start with a generic question, actually, and the three of you can choose who can answer this. You've been telling us about BCM, you've been telling us about different phases, strategies, approach, and how it is important and all of that stuff. But what we are here in Qatar, we want to understand from your experience, guys, from working in organizations and implementing BCM outside Qatar and inside Qatar, has there been any specific nature, culture, challenges to the plans and the business continuity, execution and development and execution here in Qatar that people here should be more aware of?
Well, I'll just start very briefly, and then I'll hand over to them. But one of the positives, I don't want to call it positives, let's say one of the positive outcomes of the blockade a few years ago was that people had to adjust their supply chains very quickly. Things changed overnight, basically. And it was almost a continuity situation where people really had to start thinking about this. And I think we talk a lot about culture, risk culture. Risk culture basically helps with resilience, and it helps with, the same with business continuity. You need a certain culture in order for everyone to understand and be on the same page. I think forcing people to think that way after the blockade, to think about, okay, how do we need to react to this? How do we need to change the way our supplies are coming and do how we do business? That helped build a culture in the country itself whereby people were already starting to think that way. And that has helped for example, the COVID situation, where perhaps Qatar were a bit better prepared than others, for example. So I thought I would just open it up from that aspect. But I also know that the government has also ensured that there are requirements for continuity and for people to come together, companies to come together to work on a sort of more resilient country as well. But I'll pass it on to the other panelists for their views on that question.
I mean, in my view, there was a clear cut. There was the pre-blockade and the post-blockade. Having worked in Qatar for 10 years before the blockade, I saw a huge difference in terms of getting, BCM on the agenda and getting time and investments. And even at a governmental level, there's been so many structures and different entities that have been put in place to enhance collaborative work, and that it's been a positive aspect of the blockade. So I think that has also trickled down, to all of the organizations in Qatar, just because there's this drive and lead and push from the government to make BCM a priority. So yeah.
Yeah, without wanting to locate myself only in crisis management, I think, again, my experience living in Qatar at the time of the blockade, from a crisis management perspective, I think Qatar is an exemplar for other countries internationally as to how to deal with crisis. And one thing that I wrote an article about it a couple of years ago. If you all remember, and it's still there on most of the public buildings, Tamim Al-Maj, the artwork, that was there. That there was no message with that. There wasn't a strap line with it. There was nothing fancy about it, but that brought everyone together. It gave everyone that feeling of belonging, that everyone was together at that time of crisis, and it was really cohesive. And these are the kind of things, if you could take the learning from how Qatar dealt with that crisis, apply it in your own organization. It's about having the vision, that Qatar will now start doing things the way they need to do it and do it differently. Whoever thought that there would be cattle in Qatar, or that Qatar would become an exporter of vegetables, you know, this kind of thing that 4 or 5 years ago we would never have imagined. So I think that aligned to, as Alex and Marie have both said, some of the other learning that came from that has now given a culture in Qatar that's very resilient. And the work that we've been doing as a team with a client in Qatar over the last year has highlighted that when COVID came in, one of the things that we haven't found in any of the work that we've done is that COVID caused a stop to that organization at any point in time. So it's been very, very impressive.
I just want to, I saw the chat, and Amir makes a good point about using the blockade almost as an example for the business continuity community. Funnily enough, I was in Pakistan before COVID, and I was doing some work there. And the CEO, it was risk management work, and the CEO approached me just to ask me if he should be having discussions at the CEO level about things such as what happens if the borders closed, if things escalate with India and so forth. And I gave the example of the blockade. I said, this is exactly what you should be talking about at the top level. You should be talking about this. There should be plans in place, because what happens if there is some sort of closure? And he started listing off all these things. I said, that's brilliant. Is that highlighted anywhere? Is everyone aware of this? He says, no. And this is something we'll talk about. So I flew out the next day, and then the next day, there was the parachuting incident where there was a flight, an Indian military plane or something, that somebody jumped out, parachuted and landed in Pakistan, and then he was arrested, and then there was a big issue, and all the flights were stopped and the borders were closed. So funnily enough, it literally happened a day after you talked about it. But yeah, Qatar is a really good example now and should be used as a good example going forward.
If I may just add a comment here, I really think, from being here in Qatar for a long time, and I'm referring to the slides, to the one that Alex did here, I think the COVID and the response of Qatar reflects this kind of organization. The way Qatar responded, because they responded fast, because they had plans, made them actually gain a lot of benefits. So I think now Qatar, in the eye of the world, has gained a lot of respect. Its reputation became much stronger, that it's resilient. It became actually attractive to employees who knows where is this small country that managed to respond to such things. But also from economic perspective, if you look, now they are operating the Hamad port. Now they are operating, as David mentioned, they are exporting vegetables. They are a desert country. So they really maximize the benefit from their planning of response. While at the beginning, for sure, they actually paid a lot of, they got a hit. They got a very big hit at the beginning. So just to add on this. Guys, there is a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to manage all of the questions here. There is a question for David, which is regarding the pandemic. The pandemic was identified at the UK, but was it identified at the global level? And what have this meant if it was identified? And was it identified at the same level of intensity as we are currently seeing it?
Sorry, Hatem, is that on the chat?
It is on the chat, but it actually was sent to me. So
okay, so the UK has a national risk register where all of the top thinkers on risk, all the top scientists and government people come together every year, and it's always updated. And it covers things. In the UK, there's lots of problems with floods. So a lot of times it will be flood, there'll be terrorism, there'll be this kind of thing. But for roughly the last 10 years, the top risk has been pandemic. And that's been based on what has been seen elsewhere. So it's been based on SARS, it's been based on MERS. So the UK has had this at the top of the risk register, and they've had the mitigations that have been there. And during my presentation, I asked the question of, is the UK's current position with COVID the result of bad risk management or bad crisis management? From my mind, it's bad crisis management because the risk was identified and the mitigations were there and laid out. However, they've not been implemented well. And don't get me wrong, I would hate to be a politician, but we've seen challenges with Qatar from the start has had international travel restrictions. I was meant to be over in Qatar just now, and the plan was that I was going to be coming in and have to isolate in a hotel, get tested at the airport, get tested again. Just now in the UK, a year down the line, people can still fly into the UK and walk straight out of the airport. It's just incredible. So for me, it's been about the implementation of the measures following that starting. And I think in 2, 3, 4 years' time, whenever this is all passed and gone, looking back, we'll be able to identify that the failings weren't in the planning for it. It was in effect, the management of the crisis at the time.
Yeah, and also the World Economic Forum publishes their global risks every year. And not quite pandemic, but infectious disease has always been up there. And this year there's pandemic, obviously, now that it's happened, which is a bit sort of silly. But on top of that, people have been warning about it for years. Bill Gates was running TED Talks about it.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I think people were aware, they just sort of were blinkered. Yeah.
So there is a lot of questions coming to me actually, like, and similar to this one. So just a second. So, and similar to this one, like, have we been able to identify or assess such risk? Have we been able to assess or build our plans for such scenario? And my question to you guys is, do we really need to identify all of the likely scenarios, or the business continuity plans can be still useful without even any of these detailed scenarios? Like, do we still need the plans? Because I've talked to people, they've lost trust in business continuity, saying we would never been able to predict such pandemic. So why do we need the plans in the first place?
Well, yeah, sorry, on you go, Marie, please.
Go ahead.
No,
I was going to say that one of the shortcomings or the gaps in the business continuity plans in the past was that people were trying to cover all type of incidents, all type of threats, and think through anything that can go wrong. And you had lists of hundreds of different type of scenarios, and it's impossible to be able to plan for all of that. It's not only sustainable, but chances are that life is such that what's going to happen is not what you plan for. And so recently, as part of best practice, an approach that's being consistently used more and more is to plan according to the type of impact. So essentially, in your organization, from an operational standpoint, there's essentially 4 types of impacts that you can encounter: the loss or unavailability of your staff, of your technologies, of your asset, premises, or equipment, or of your supplies or suppliers. So if you plan to be able to cope in spite of the unavailability of these resources, you essentially are covered against all types of scenarios. And this is really the approach that people are trying to follow. Of course, you may not have a specific workarounds for every of your hundreds of activities. But again, it's about, as part of the BIA stage, looking into the critical aspects, the showstoppers, and, year 1 and 2 of your BCM program, focusing on those. And as your program matures, then you can start incorporating more and more of those activities and resources. But really, if you stick to that, then you should be in a position where you're much more resilient in the face of any of those disruptions.
Marie, thank you. Thank you, really. Like, I've been trying to say what you've just said in simple words to all of the people who asked me these questions, and I've never been as articulative as this. Thank you. Really, like, you made it very clear in my head as well. So thank you for that.
It just goes to show the importance of how risk management and business continuity overlap, and inform each other. Because essentially, whilst doing business continuity, you may identify risks that were otherwise missed. But at the same time, if you have a risk management function that is identifying risks across the organization, and they find certain risks that are business continuity related, that, you know, if they impact, will have an impact on our continuity, then you might want to then revisit your business continuity plans to look at, well, does this actually cover this? I noticed Sean had in the chat talked about, oh, the next big risk will be something that was you know, we didn't expect. Well, absolutely, which is why we do risk management, which is why we should do emerging risks as well, horizon scanning. What in the future could eventually come and haunt us? What is the next big thing coming? What are our vulnerabilities? If we understand our vulnerabilities and dependencies, that's where we can build this sort of business continuity planning around. As for black swans, let's not waste time trying to identify them too much. Let's try to understand what potential impacts to our business, no matter what the event, and then have business continuity plans to protect it.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. There are more questions, and actually you referred to Sean, and the way I asked the question was reflecting on Sean trying to identify the unidentifiable, which might be the case in future risks that we cannot foresee coming. Another interesting question from Rahat. Can you guys explain the difference between the business continuity and resilience? I think this is a tough one.
So this is really good, this one. I like this question. Sorry, I'm hogging this one simply because I've been doing some training on resilience, and basically resilience is an organization's resilience no matter what hits. Business continuity usually focuses on a shorter period. Let's say we usually focus on a 30-day period. How do we get our critical activities back up and running within a 30-day period? If we can do without our activity for more than 30 days, we're not so concerned about it. We're really focusing on what is going to basically put us out of business or really cause serious damage to our business. Resilience is much more holistic. You need a resilient workforce, one that understands risk, one that understands continuity, one that is agile. You need a structure that is agile and resilient to anything that hits. If you are a resilient organization, not only will your business continuity plans be more effective, not only will you be able to deal with crisis and crisis management situations more effectively, you will also be able to adapt to any situation. So if you didn't have a plan, you can still be resilient and adapt to the situation and turn it into your favor. For example, the perfume companies who are during COVID stopping making their perfume, or in conjunction with the perfume, they're making the hand sanitizers, or the restaurants that quickly adapt to become a sort of takeaway service only, or the, you know, all these different types of business models that are changing and adapting to deal with the current situation. So having a resilient organization is much more holistic, and it's about being able to be agile, but also predict what's coming. That's where the emerging risks come as well. And that's where we need a structure that will allow resilience. And I think that's where we start getting the overlap between contingencies and, you know, how can we build contingency into our business model? And then how can we build business continuity plans to ensure that that we can cope during an event? Does anyone else want to say anything? Because
actually, I like one comment to you, Alex, here, very important. Like you've mentioned, the ability to adopt and change, even if you don't have the plans. Does this mean that resilience is more about the culture of the organization and their change management?
Yeah, definitely a big part of it. Definitely a big part of it. You can have no plans in place and do a very good job of a situation if you have the right culture. But you can have the best plans in the world, but if you haven't got the right culture, you haven't got the right training, then you're not a resilient organization. Your plans are just a plan. It's like a procedure. You can have great procedures, but if no one's following the procedure,
exactly, I agree.
Companies that have no procedure could be doing it very well. I don't know what David and Marie think.
Well, from my perspective, one of the other things about resilience, and Alex also mentioned that resilience is about being holistic. So it's not about a single approach. For me, there's an element of if you took your, and I think maybe familiar with the old PPRR thing, the planning, preparation, response, recovery. That's part of what I would call the resilience cycle, that it's not about one bit. It's not, you can have a risk register, but if that's all you've got, then you're only dealing with one part of it. So being a resilient organization is about having that whole cycle encompassed, that you've got your plans, you've looked at what the risks are, you've got your plans to mitigate, your testing, your training, your exercising, you've got your response plan should it go wrong, you've got your business continuity plan should it go wrong, and your crisis management plan. So as opposed to it being one element of what we all do, it's about that holistic approach. And I think, as Alex said, I would agree completely that thing about resilient organizations, and there's some really good examples. And again, I as I say, I wrote an article about Qatar a couple of years ago, which I've just loaded onto chat. I'm not quite sure.
Thank you. Yeah, we got it, David. Thank you. Thank you. I think everybody got it.
Yeah. But that's about Qatar being resilient at the time of, or just after the time of the blockade. So it is that holistic thing. And I don't know if Marie's got anything else that she wants to add.
Yeah, I was going to say it's also about being proactive and that long-term business continuity or strategic business continuity. So being able to recognize where the organization is starting to fail or is starting to no longer respond to the demand from the market. So being able to scan the market to decide to let go of some products and develop new ones or acquire new businesses. So it's also that long-term aspect that is a key component of resilience as well, in my opinion.
Thank you. Guys, I'll follow up with another question coming from Bilal. So he's asking, like, should continuity or resilience planning include changes to organizations structure to build in resilience? I think you've been answering this as we speak, but I thought of like reflecting the question. So again, the question, should the resilience planning include changes to organization structure to build in resilience? As it were, and is there any relevant examples?
I mean, for my part, if you are talking exclusively about business continuity, usually organizational change are something that are planned. They don't happen overnight. They're discussed, they're talked through, they're thought through. So there shouldn't necessarily be a need to include that per se in a business continuity plan. But if you're talking about, the sudden loss or unavailability of key staff or a large portion of staff, then definitely this has to be included in your business continuity arrangements. And what form or shape that might be is a succession planning effort, or a plan dedicated specifically for the swift replacement of a large amount of staff. So you might have predefined manpower companies that were identified. You might have a database of CVs or of people that you could call in to replace certain staff. So those are typically some of the measures that could address some of these issues you mentioned. And yes, they are included, or they should be included as part of your business continuity planning effort.
There's a very good document on the IRM website called Horizon Scanning, and it discusses how you can do horizon scanning and what emerging risks are. I'm just linking that to the resilience discussion because if you're looking into the future, it will tell you potentially what could impact the way you do business today, may be impacted in 4 or 5 years' time, how you do business. And that's an example of where resilience comes into it because you're forward planning. In terms of this, I mean, I worked with a tea company that felt that there was a lot of business continuity risk in their supply chain. They changed their whole business model. They bought their whole supply chain right down to the tea plantations in Sri Lanka, and I can't remember where else. So they actually changed their whole business model to remain protected and resilient. And it came through their business continuity strategy. When they were reviewing their business continuity plans, they decided, no, it's not good enough. We will actually change our whole business model.
I think a couple of points in that, Alex. First of all, I see someone's asking, are you able to put the link on to the IRM horizon scanning document.
Yes, please.
But secondly, on that point, and I think this is the point that I was trying to make about the UK earlier, the horizon scanning and identification of challenges and risks and threats is one part of it, but resilience only comes when you then do the rest of the job properly. And from my perspective as a citizen of the UK, that's where the UK has fallen down just now. We'd identified pandemic as a major risk, but we now have I think the highest death rate per capita, or certainly amongst the top few in the world. But one other thing, Hatem, sorry, I'm cherry picking here
That's okay.
Question. And I see there's a question there from Mirza about culture being important and senior management doing things as a paper exercise. And I think we would all agree with that. I can give you an example, and I'm not going to name the company, but working with a company where the CEO decided that he wanted certification for ISO 9001, 22301, 27001, and 31000, and he wanted them all in 6 weeks. And it might not surprise some people on this call to say that he found a company who was able to provide him with those certifications within 6 weeks. No one in that organization was ready for it. So the certificates were hanging on the wall, but absolutely no one in the organization was properly trained, and the organization didn't have policies, procedures, or structures in place to deal with it. And I think that that's something that I know in Qatar in particular, certification, both of organizations and individuals, is seen as being critical. So, you know, that's one of the things. And I think really good for us in this past year, the company that we've all been working with through Mazars, their outset, or their plan at the outset was they weren't interested in certification. They wanted to do business continuity well. And if at the end of it, they had processes in place that allowed them to then go for the ISO 22301 certification, then they would do that. But it was the focus. It wasn't style over substance. It was all about the substance, which is really positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David, for this. Actually, just to add, like the company you were referring to, they had the documented policies and procedures, but no one knows it exists. No one is following it. And it's exactly like what Marie mentioned. It's a document that no one knows anything about it. So, and this is a problem in ISO in general. You can pass by just a set of documentation rather than any substance being in place. There is another question from Misra as well, and related to the way the world responded to COVID, and was there a failure in the leadership, seeing how China responded better than the other worlds. So was there a failure in the leadership here?
Who are you going to get to answer that? From my perspective,
it's a political question. So
from my perspective,
let me ask it another way: is democracy failing us?
I don't think democracy is failing us. I think some leaders are failing us because they haven't given as much weight to the expert opinion of emergency managers, crisis managers, health experts and scientists. And that's why I said earlier on that I wouldn't want to be a politician, because the politicians also have to look at the economics of the country. So in the UK, lots of businesses were allowed to remain open to try and keep the economy strong, but all that did was help spread COVID. You know, I think now there's a question there from Neddy that perhaps we need to look at. Alex, Are you able to touch on that?
So Neddy's question is talking about, like, in their organization, the business continuity is defined as any risk arising from failure to plan and prepare, mitigating, responding, and recovery from major incidents. So the question is, can you please advise if this definition has captured the essence of business continuity, or there are elements that is missing?
I'll let someone else answer that. I'm not a big fan of definitions, to be honest. I'll let somebody else answer that. There's so many standards that you can use to find definitions and so forth. And I find that it's always going to be different depending on your organization. But I'll let someone else answer that if they don't mind.
I saw earlier on in the messages that Dylan had put in a pretty straightforward definition of what his company have for business continuity. I don't know, Hatem, if you want to ask Dylan to.
I'm gonna go. Dylan can speak if he still online. Actually, I remember he mentioned very positive comment that I totally agreed with him.
I mean, the definition captures it. It's the question is it understandable? Is it too wordy? Is there anything missing? You know,
so
if we asked people, or they could add less.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's important that you, sorry, this is Dylan here. It's important that you are clear on defining what constitutes a business continuity event, because at the end of the day, that's what you're going to be planning around. So if your definitions are not clear, so if they're too sort of high level, you could end up in a situation where your plans aren't actually fit for purpose. So what we did was we looked at our risk matrix. We looked at our impact categories, and inside of our impact categories, we've got financial impacts, operational impacts, health and safety impacts, reputational impacts. And we selected well-defined criteria that anything above that would constitute a business continuity event. So any event that has the potential to result in that impact or greater, we consider that as business continuity, and therefore it should be applicable to our planning process. Anything less than that, we're really not interested. We take care of that through risk management or any other kind of control system that we have in place. So we referenced our corporate risk appetite as the sort of benchmark to defining where we will pitch business continuity.
I have to say, guys, sorry. I have to say that the definition that you apply in your organization will significantly change depending on the nature of your business. So most of us here are coming from an oil and gas business. You will find the health and safety is a big aspect of it, which is obviously because you are dealing with hydrocarbon and combustible materials. But if you make the same definition and you are a bank, the financial impact is going to be the most important thing, the credit risk, the relation to another global financial crisis impacting their ability to sustain their business. It's not going to be safety. So it's not going to be related to a fire or a safety incident. Safety will not be in their anything related to what they want to talk about. They're going to talk about their financial resilience. They're going to talk about their financial ability to continue. They're going to talk about credit and operations and IT. Like the banking, for example, their business continuity plans are mainly IT because they're just really very heavy IT companies. So I wouldn't be stuck to definitions. I would actually refer to how Marie nicely put it, which is things that is impacting the four categories, regardless of the incident, impacting these four categories that is stopping you from your ability to achieve your strategic objectives. I would really put it at that very high level, because every organization, when they want to nail their definition down, they can based on their nature, the specific type of their nature, business.
Yeah, I wrote in the messages early on, I sent a private message just saying, I'd be happy to review it and let him know if he sends me his email address, I'll have a proper look through it and then get back to him. Because with definitions, it's very difficult. You really need to sit down and have a look at it.
Yeah.
But it definitely needs to be something that's clear, understandable for everyone, that's in the policy, for example. So that's very clear for everyone to understand. And relevant to your business. And I think that is the answer that we're coming to. But yeah, if you send me a private message with your email address, I'd be happy to review it and get back to you. But I need time to review it.
Absolutely. Guys, we have 2 minutes, so I'll allow one last question. So I'm not sure if there is anyone who would like to. Okay, Dylan, here's definition are important. Yeah, this is another comment. Any one final question, guys, that we would like to ask our panelists? I hope that I covered.
Say, amazing amount of questions.
Yes,
And,
the interaction is really very high.
I want to say
think
that every time I've attended a Qatar event, the members are absolutely brilliant. I've attended a lot of the other IRM SIGs and RIGs, special interest groups and regional groups, and they're rarely quite as interactive as this. So well done to everyone, and well done, Hatem, for organizing. I just also want to mention that there is an energy special interest group on the IRM website that you can join. And we also run a lot of sessions specific to the energy sector.
Exactly. I would actually recommend that for a lot of our champions and a lot of our members here to attend this group, Alex. And thank you for this. Like I was going to say, the reason the questions is a lot because it's an excellent facilitation session by me. So thank you.
There's a question there. That
yes, exactly. From Al-Amri. I would like to know what the panelist insight concerning the following. The energy sector is going through a monetary problem and downsizing is the key word. How can we learn, I guess, companies with limited staff implement robust BCM, even though many staff that have critical knowledge have become redundant? It's a brilliant question. And I think, Alex, me and you have faced this during some of our engagements. We know that QP has been demanding reduction 30% in costs. And what does this mean from risk and business resilience? So I'll leave you to answer this, but it's a brilliant question from Al-Amri, أنا آسف. Noura Al-Amri, or I don't know who is Al-Amri, but thank you for the question.
David or Marie, do you want to answer this? I'm happy to answer, but I'll let you two get your views in first if you want.
Yeah, I think size isn't everything. It goes back to the bit around having a structure in place, so it doesn't matter the size of the organization. I think in this one, if you're losing key staff who have critical knowledge about BCM, it's then making sure that someone else is identified. I think Alex mentioned way earlier in the presentation that the company we've been working with recently in Qatar had risk single points of contact. What's the right terminology, Alec? Sorry?
Risk champions.
Yeah, risk champions. And what they've done for our work with the business continuity is just say that these risk champions will become the champions for business continuity as well within the organization. So I think that there's some key points in that question that in downsizing with limited staff, yes, you can implement a robust BCM. It's just about making sure that any staff that are leaving with critical information, that there's some plan to make sure that organizational memory is maintained.
Any final point from you, Alex, Marie?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with organizations of all sorts of sizes and with limited budgets as well. I remember when I first got into business continuity, in the, let's see, it was in the early 2000s, working with local authorities in the UK, and they had very limited budgets. And so luckily I worked for a company, Zurich Municipal, who were not a profit center. We were added value center for their insurance arm. So I was doing risk consulting without having to charge crazy money, but also it was still, we were still having to be competitive. So we were able to do business continuity plans at a very basic level, of course, in the space of a few weeks that were high level with the senior management that at least covered their critical activities, of which there might be 3 or 4 critical activities that they were really worried about as a starting point. And we just sat down with the people that did know. We ran a workshop for half a day. We identified those critical activities. We tried to prioritize them. Then we ran another half-day workshop a couple of weeks later when we looked at the risks. We ran another half-day workshop where we considered the strategies, and we brought in the people that needed to be brought in, whether it was IT or HR, that would know a little bit more about how we can resolve some of these issues. And then we built the plan in a separate session. Now, was it ideal? No. Was it good enough for what they needed at the time? Yes, because they had no budget. So if you're working for an organization that has no budget, that doesn't have people, that it's a lean organization, then it doesn't need to be a huge, massive project. At the end of the day, what you're doing is identifying your critical activities and thinking, how can I make sure that we can survive and keep these alive? When 9/11 happened and the Twin Towers came down, Marsh, the insurance broker, was up and running the next day. Now, they lost a lot of people in the Twin Towers themselves, but they were up and running the next day to a very, very limited service. You're talking hours before you got through to them, but it was acceptable due to the consequences. So your plans don't even need to go into the detail where we need to be up and running immediately after 5 minutes. It can be just what's going to be acceptable, what is going to be acceptable to us and to our clients. Just think a little bit about it, have the discussions. If you're not going to be able to build the plans, at least have the discussions, but they don't need to be overly complex. I go back to that. If you're lean, don't try to make it complex. Just keep it simple. Keep it simple. Think about what's our activities that we must have up and running. What strategies do we have? We can't afford an external server, like a backup server room. So what can we do? Can we maybe use the cloud? Because then we've essentially got a backup in the cloud. That doesn't cost as much. And as long as we have internet, maybe we buy those SIM cards so everyone has access to the internet. There you go, strategy. And now we can look at the plan thereafter. That's a simple example, but I'm just trying to point out that we don't need to make it a huge, massive exercise if you're in that situation. It's better to have simple plans than no plans. Ideally, you have well thought out plans that have, had all the time to be considered in the business impact analysis and everything, but not everyone is in that situation.
Thank you, guys. Conscious of time, I'm sure all of the participants, and I've been seeing a lot of very positive messages from them, thanking the panelists. Really, guys, cannot thank you enough. You've been sharing a lot of information, a lot of insights. The feedback is very clear from all of the messages. Just one final comment from me. The session is recorded. It will be available soon. Guys, please use your thumb ups in your Zoom to thank the participants. It was really informative session. Cannot thank you all enough for this, and we're gonna just end it up. So thank you really so much all, and hopefully see you all very much soon again. Thank you again all, and see you all. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, panelists. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.